Hello, everyone. My name is Ruth of Novolink Immigration. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. In this video, I'll be talking about how you can immigrate to Canada to work as an internationally educated nurse. Specifically, I'll be focusing on how you can come to work in the province of British Columbia. Now, when I talk about nurses, there are three categories that this information applies to. We have the registered nurses, we have the registered psychiatric nurses, and we have the licensed practical nurse. I also need to state that all of these I'm giving you is for information purpose only. If you want one-on-one consultation or you want more personalized information, you can look in the description box below to book a consultation session, and I'll be more than happy to help you with this. So let's get started right away. Now, to be able to come to work in Canada as an internationally educated nurse, and by that I mean if someone who has studied to get their nursing credential outside of Canada. So if you studied in any other country to become a nurse, this information applies to you. The very first thing to do is to assess your educational credential. Now, what this basically means is because you studied outside of Canada, there are bodies who would look at your educational courses and credential and compare it with what is obtainable in Canada to see if the education you underwent really tallies or is up to the standard of what is obtainable here in Canada. To do your credential assessment, the British Columbia College of Nurses and Midwives uses five major bodies. We have the Canadian version of the World Educational Services. We also have the BCIT International Credential Evaluation Service, also known as ICES. We have the ICAS, that is the International Credential Assessment. We have the Comparative Education Services and the National Nursing Assessment. Now, there is no preference for any of these ones, but from experience, I sometimes tell people to go with the National Nursing Assessment Service and the ICAS because they sometimes tend to give a better evaluation for some specific countries depending on the kind of credential you have. So that's the very first step. Ensure you do your credential assessment. You must have your credential assessment before you can begin this process. And basically, what these five bodies have mentioned would do would be to ask you to submit your certificate and your transcript, and they are able to do this comparison basically to assess your educational credential. The next step after your credential assessment is the English language proficiency. You will need to demonstrate that you have a language proficiency of the required standard by the regulating body for the nurses and midwives in British Columbia. Basically, the types of tests are acceptable. We have the International English Language Testing System, the IELTS, which is a very popular one. The academic version is what is acceptable, and you need to have an overall band score of 7. You have reading 6.5, listening 7, writing 6.5, and speaking 6.5. As well, they accept the Canadian English Language Benchmark Assessment for nurses, also known as CELBAN. And for that, you need reading to be 8, listening to be 9, writing to be 7, and speaking to be 8. Now, you must know that for the CELBAN, you can use an in-person or online assessment. However, for the IELTS, they only accept the in-person test assessment. I should also state at this point that not everyone is required to write this language proficiency test. Depending on your country of education, if you underwent your education primarily in English language and you can prove that this is the case, then you may not be required to write the language proficiency. But you can only get to know this by writing directly to the BCCNM, and they can confirm to you if you are required to write a language test or you are exempted. That is the second step done. The third step is to apply to Inspire Global Assessments. This is a crucial step in your application. You will need to apply to them to demonstrate your identity, demonstrate the credential assessment that you must have gotten from one of the bodies I mentioned, this above, as well as your language proficiency. So, Inspire Global Assessment would review your application to see that it is in order, and they would contact you for the next steps. So, after completing step one and step two, step three, apply to Inspire Global Assessment. They review your education, they review your language test, and let you know what the next steps would be. Now, these next steps could be one of two steps. It could require you to complete what we call a competency assessment or to go for what is called a transitional education. Basically, the competency assessment, which could be required by Inspire Global Assessment, is a way to kind of see to evaluate your nursing skills against the competencies that are required for nurses here in Canada. It's a kind of assessment that consists of, a computer-based assessment and a lab simulation. So they want to see the skills you prove to have or that you've acquired as a nurse while studying to become a nurse. Does it really match up to the standard or the requirement for nurses here in Canada? But like I mentioned before, it is Inspire Global Assessment. If they think you need this, they would let you know after going through your application. Now, there are three types of tests that this body runs. They run one for the registered nurses, they run another one for the licensed practical nurses, and the third one, which is not applicable in this case, is for the healthcare assistants. However, as nurses, you would be required, if you're a registered nurse, to either take the registered nurse one, or if you're a licensed practical nurse, you would be required to take the second one, the one for the licensed practical nurse, if they so think that you need to do it. After the step, the next thing is to go for your BCCNM application. Now, while you complete the steps above, you can also initiate your application with the regulator body, that's the body for the nurses and midwives in British Columbia. At this step, they would require further documentation from you. They want to know more about your background and they want to see more about the experiences that you claim to have as an international educated nurse who is applying to come to Canada. The BCCNM might require you to go upgrade your education and skills. They can do this in one of two ways. They can ask you to go for more courses, take individual courses, or do a kind of re-entry to practice program. So once they look at your credentials, look at your background, the experiences you claim, where you've worked, how long, and all of this, they then decide what type of transitional education they want you to go for. Maybe just to take some individual courses that would apply to you, or to go for an entire re-entry to program. And I feel as though this re-entry to program would oftentimes happen if there has been a gap in your practice or in acquiring skills as a nurse. Now, the next very important step is your registration exam. Once you have completed the BCCNM registration requirements and they are satisfied with you, if you had to do the competency assessment, if you had to do the transitional education, once they are satisfied, they've looked at all your credentials, they've looked at your background, your experience, and your skills, and they are satisfied with you, they would refer you to write your registration exam that matches your nursing credential. So if you are a registered nurse, you'll be required to write the NCLEX, that is the National Council Licensure Exam for registered nurses. If you're a psychiatric nurse, you'll be required to write the RPN-CE. And if you are a licensed practical nurse, you'll be required to write the RX LPN. So basically, those are the three types of exams, and depending on the kind of nurse you are, you will be required to write one of these examinations. So the next step, which is the most important step where you can congratulate yourself, will be practicing as a fully registered BCCNM nurse. So once you have passed your examination, that is the registration examination I just talked about, you will then be required to pay the annual BCCNM registration fee, and then you can transition to practicing as a fully fledged nurse in British Columbia. I need to state at this point that while you're also waiting to write your registration exam, you can opt to obtain the provisional registration. Basically, this allows you to practice as a nurse under supervision while you're waiting to write your exam. So you can apply to BCCNM, and if you're eligible to get this provisional registration, they will let you know and it will be given to you, and then you can practice while you're waiting to write your registration exam. So basically, these are the steps. So I'll do a quick recap of everything. First of all, you need to do your credential assessment by one of the five bodies I mentioned. And then you also need to show that you have the language competency to practice in British Columbia, which you can achieve by showing that you either studied in English or you take the IELTS or the CELBUM and get the required test scores. This is what you need to apply to Inspire Global Assessment, and they have a look at your credentials to see if it does match the requirement for nurses in British Columbia. Based on whatever they see, they may recommend you to go for the competency assessment test or to go for the transitional education. Upon successful completion of those, they would refer you to write your registration exams. And if successful, you're then able to pay your annual dues and become a fully licensed nurse in British Columbia. Now, you can do this from anywhere in the world. Wherever you are, you can go through all of these processes. Upon successful completion, you will then need to get a job that allows you to immigrate to Canada after going through the work permit processes to then work in Canada as a nurse in British Columbia. I hope this video has been informative for you and you can then use it to fulfill your dream of coming to Canada as a nurse. Until next time, stay blessed. Bye.